Welcome back to Weekends with Anna Kasparian and Michael Brooks. Joining us now is journalist and speechwriter and senior advisor for the Bernie Sanders campaign, David Sirota. Thank you for joining us, David.
Thanks for having me. It's great to see you guys.
So I wanted to start off by asking you about some of the teachable moments from the Sanders 2020 campaign. What would you say we can take with us moving forward as leftists who really do want to implement the policies that he championed?
Well, obviously the polls tell us that the terms of the political debate and what people want have changed dramatically in the sense of, things like Medicare for all, things like a Green New Deal. So, I'm not one of these people who says that, we won when we lost. I mean, let's be clear, we lost the election and we should go over why we lost the election. But I do think that taking the historical long view here, that Bernie Sanders as a political leader and the Bernie Sanders campaign, I think the best case scenario would be that his campaign is a campaign that helped change what's called the Overton window, or what basically moving the parameters of the debate. And if you want to look at it in historical terms, and I want to be explicitly clear about this, so it's not taken out of context to suggest that I like Ronald Reagan, just putting that out there. But the metaphor would be that there was Barry Goldwater for the right, who created and pioneered and trailblazed an ideological path that ultimately was realized by the election of Ronald Reagan. And if for progressives, Bernie Sanders plays the role of a trailblazing pioneer who then, as a Barry Goldwater figure, who then helps create the political topography for a progressive version of Ronald Reagan, that would be a significant accomplishment for him and for this movement. And I think there's a lot of things to take away from the election to suggest that is where we are in the arc of history. But again, I just want to reiterate, just for people if they want to take me out of context and say that I'm saying that Bernie Sanders is Barry Goldwater, that's not what I'm saying. And I'm not saying I like Ronald Reagan. But the metaphor, I hope, still stands.
David's more of a George H.W. Bush guy. Yeah, I understand the need to do that, which is a whole other conversation for another day. But in order to do that, in order to follow that trajectory, and I want to just bring this into the conversation, this new report in The Intercept that Ryan Grimm did on this firm Hawkfish, which I know you're familiar with, the Bloomberg firm basically pitching its services as a vendor to the Biden campaign. And I'm curious your thoughts on that generally, but also what is the meeting point between the fact that, of course, Bernie has shown this incredible leadership, and there's also like the depressing, disgusting part, which is we're going into a Great Depression with no public health response really to a pandemic, and the need for labor organizing. There's going to be plenty of people right now that will move to some type of left because conditions are so awful. There'll be people who maybe a couple months ago they did think like, hey, I don't want some big disruption in the healthcare system. Well, they're about to lose their healthcare if they haven't already, right? Like really awful things will also set that context. But beyond the level of like ideas and ideology and overturned window and polls, what about the literal infrastructure of the Democratic Party, of like who's actually running it, what firms are getting contracted, and how does that relate to this broader effort to carry on that analogy of Goldwater to Reagan?
Well, look, I mean, obviously the Democratic Party establishment, and establishment is a word that's overused, but as we understand it, an establishment is it's not just the elected officials, it's the think tanks, it's the adjacent media organizations, it is the consulting firms, it is the lobbying firms, it is the trade associations. All that establishment clearly wants to make sure, in the words of Joe Biden, that, quote, nothing would fundamentally change even during this crisis. Now, I'm sure the argument is and there is merit to this, that Joe Biden and the Democratic Party being in control of the executive branch would be a fundamental change from Donald Trump. And we can't deny that. That is absolutely the case. But generally speaking, for the economy, for working people's lives, the establishment is offering at best incremental change, a public option, not Medicare for all, incremental climate policies, not a Green New Deal, and the like. And that's a long way of saying that that's never going to change, that an establishment in a sense it exists to preserve the status quo. That it's established and it wants to keep it that way and preserve its power. So that's a long way of saying that the organizing that is going to have to change the trajectory of Democratic Party history and of American history is probably going to have to be done both outside of the Democratic Party, in workplaces all across this country, right? Almost outside of, in a lot of cases, the electoral political arena and in the labor organizing space. And we've seen that, and we've seen a lot of good signs from that. So there's going to have to be that. And then there's going to have to be an effort to essentially take over or take back, whatever metaphor you want to use, the Democratic Party right now. And we've seen movements like that in the past that have been successful. And I think, again, going back to the Bernie campaign, I think the Bernie campaign, one of its legacies will be is that it has emboldened the base of the Democratic Party at the voter level. It has emboldened the activists. It has emboldened a new crop of elected officials, some of whom are at the local level, state level. Like, for instance, my wife, she's a state representative. She won her primary with the help of Bernie Sanders. And, you know, looking out further in future years, where these elected officials go from whether they're at the city council level, the state legislature, do they move into larger positions in government and therefore in the Democratic Party? This is all an organic process. I want to be also clear that I'm not saying my wife is running for a higher office or anything like that. I'm making a larger point here. That I'll give you another example, like Ro Khanna, right? Ro Khanna was our co-chair, an elected member of Congress. Where does Ro Khanna go from here in terms of, does he try to go run for a higher office? Does he have a bigger role inside the Democratic Party if he remains in the House as a more and more senior member of Congress? Ultimately, these things take time. And I think so all that's to say that the trends that we're looking at, the outside organizing, the labor activism, and the I don't love the word infiltration, but the emboldened base of the Democratic Party, those are trends that tell us that I do think we are moving a Democratic Party in a more progressive direction. And I should add that, as you alluded to, the external factors in our economy are certainly underscoring the urgency of the policy argument being made by progressives, by labor unions, and by the progressive movement as a whole.